Her poor little girl sitting on the sidewalk refuses money from a young billionaire and says, "I don't want money. I just wanted a dad who loved me." What happens next is unbelievable. The November sky darkened over New York City as the last rays of sun painted the skyscrapers in orange hues. Alan Mercer adjusted his Italian tie and checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. His driver was late, something unacceptable for a man whose business empire was built on precision and efficiency. "Incompetence," he muttered, shoving his phone into the pocket of his custom-made suit jacket. The meeting with the Japanese investors had ended exactly as he had planned. Numbers, strategies, forecasts, everything calculated with the coldness that had made him famous in business circles. The Ice Emperor, they called him behind his back. Not that he cared. Feelings were never good for business. The street was almost deserted at that hour. The employees from the neighboring offices had already left, leaving only the cold wind that rushed between the tall buildings. Alan took a deep breath, feeling the frigid air fill his lungs. His empire was worth every second of dedication. 52 floors above, the Mercer Enterprises sign glowed against the night sky, a beacon of his success. It was then that he noticed a movement on the opposite sidewalk. Something small, almost imperceptible if not for the contrast with the empty street. A child, a little girl with brown hair, tousled by the wind, sitting alone in the middle of the city that never sleeps. Alan frowned. The little girl looked no older than 5. She wore a faded blue dress under a coat far too thin for the cold. Her small fingers gripped a worn-out teddy bear tightly, as if that toy were the only real thing in her world. There was something unsettling in the way she just sat there, not crying or asking for help, as if she had accepted her loneliness, but his eyes kept drifting back to the small figure. The girl wasn't crying, she wasn't screaming. She was just hugging something to her chest, a worn-out teddy bear, with one ear almost falling off. Her feet dangled without touching the ground, and she wore a coat that was too thin for the cold. There was a strange dignity in her silence, something that seemed out of place in someone so young. Her eyes, even from a distance, seemed to observe the world with an understanding beyond her years. She didn't look lost, exactly. She looked abandoned, as if she were waiting for someone who would never come. The scene bothered him more than it should have. Children were not part of his world. He had no children, never wanted them. His ex-wife, Caroline, had made it clear that this was one of the reasons their 5-year marriage had come to an end. "You don't know how to love anything but your numbers," she had said the day she left, taking only her clothes and leaving behind a silence he never managed to fill. Alan crossed the street before he could think better of it. His Italian shoes echoed on the concrete, creating a steady rhythm he used to organize his thoughts. 1 step, 2 steps. Maybe he would just ask if she was lost, maybe call the police, solve the situation and move on with his life. The girl looked up as he approached. She must have been about 5, maybe 6. Her eyes were large and a shade of green that seemed to absorb all the remaining light of the day. Delicate freckles dotted her small nose, and her brown hair fell in messy waves around a face that looked like an unfinished painting. Beautiful, but with traces of something missing. There was no fear in her eyes when Alan stopped in front of her. Just a calm curiosity, as if she were studying a strange phenomenon. "Are you lost?" he finally asked, his voice rougher than he intended. The little girl didn't answer, just squeezed the bear tighter against her chest. Alan sighed, annoyed with himself for getting involved. He took his wallet from the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a few bills. Money solved problems. That was one of the few absolute truths in his world. Throughout his entire life, Alan had never encountered a situation that couldn't be resolved with the right amount of cash. People, problems, obstacles, everything had its price. It was simple, it was practical. "Here," he said, holding out the $100 bills, "to buy yourself something to eat. This should solve your problem." It was then that it happened. The girl lifted her face, and Alan saw that her eyes were welling up, not with ordinary fear or sadness, but with a loneliness so profound it seemed ancient for someone so young. "I don't want money," she said, her voice small but firm. There was a melody in her speech, a slight accent Alan couldn't place. "I just wanted a dad who loved me." The words came out with a devastating simplicity, as if she were merely stating a fact of the world. The teddy bear in her arms, a faded brown object with mismatched button eyes, seemed to watch Alan with the same intensity as its owner. The words hit Alan like a punch to the gut. He took a step back, almost tripping on the sidewalk. The money in his hand suddenly felt ridiculous, pathetic. Something strange happened inside him, as if an internal structure he didn't even know existed began to crack. For the first time in his adult life, Alan Mercer was facing a problem that money couldn't solve. The rejection of the bills, something he had never experienced, left him momentarily speechless. In his world, people begged for the very notes the little girl refused without hesitation. He stood there, paralyzed, as an unfamiliar sensation spread through his chest. It wasn't pity. He knew pity. It was easy to dismiss. This was something deeper, as if this child had touched a wound he had spent his entire life pretending didn't exist. The sound of his car's horn broke the moment. James had finally arrived, parking the black Mercedes by the curb. Alan blinked, returning to reality, and put the money back in his pocket with slightly trembling hands. I have to go," he said, turning his back on the girl and walking quickly toward the car. James got out to open the door. "Sorry for the delay, sir. The traffic on the—" "It doesn't matter," Alan cut him off, getting into the vehicle. "Home." As the car pulled away, Alan couldn't help but look through the rear window. The girl was still there, motionless, watching him leave. Her teddy bear dangled from one hand like a silent guardian. There was something in the way she stood there, small against the backdrop of the enormous city, that seemed to tell an entire story without words. A child who didn't run after the car begging for help. A child who didn't scream or cry. A child who just stood there, as if she were used to seeing people leave. Alan didn't answer. What could he say? That an unknown child had just shattered something inside him with only 9 words. The drive to his Fifth Avenue penthouse was silent. The city passed in luminous blurs outside, but Alan saw nothing but those green eyes, that small voice. "I just wanted a dad who loved me." Who was that child? Lily. The name popped into his mind without him knowing why. She looked like a lily, fragile and resilient at the same time. He had no idea what her real name was, but in his thoughts, she was Lily now. A small flower growing in the city's cold concrete. But a little girl on the sidewalk had left him floored. The penthouse apartment greeted him with its usual silence, spacious, elegant, impeccably decorated by a renowned designer Caroline had hired years ago. A place featured in architecture magazines, but one that never felt like a home. Alan dropped his briefcase on the coffee table and went straight to the bar. The whiskey burned his throat but didn't wash away the image of the girl. He loosened his tie and walked to the panoramic window. Down below, the city pulsed with millions of lights, each one representing a life, a story. And somewhere in that ocean of lights, there was a little girl with a tattered teddy bear. His cell phone rang. It was David Peterson, his chief financial officer, probably wanting to discuss the reaction of the Japanese investors. Alan ignored the call and poured himself more whiskey. Work had always been his refuge, his only constant. But tonight, for the first time in years, the numbers felt empty. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop, determined to focus on something familiar. There were emails to answer, reports to review, decisions to make. The world didn't stop because of a strange encounter with a child. The letters on the screen, however, blurred before his eyes. How could a girl so young be alone? Why was no one looking for her? Was anyone waiting for her? The questions piled up in his mind, pushing away any possibility of concentration. He slammed the laptop shut. The silence of the apartment seemed more oppressive than ever. He remembered Caroline saying years ago that she wanted to fill this place with the laughter of children. He had dismissed the idea as an inconvenience. Children were noisy, unpredictable, demanded constant attention. They didn't fit into his meticulously organized life. And now, ironically, A child he didn't even know was occupying all his thoughts. When he finally went to bed, sleep wouldn't come. Alan tossed and turned, replaying the scene in his mind. I just wanted a dad who loved me. The phrase echoed like a mantra, like an accusation. Why that specific girl? He had seen needy children before, had donated millions to charities. He had never gotten personally involved. He had always maintained the safe distance that money provided. But there was something in her eyes, something familiar. The truth hit him like a cold wave at 3 in the morning. Those eyes, he recognized them because he saw the same eyes every morning in the mirror, eyes that carried the weight of an old loneliness, a pain that money couldn't touch. Alan got up and walked to the bathroom, staring at his reflection in the mirror. Fair 42-year-old man, graying at the temples, with expression lines marking a face that rarely smiled. What had that girl seen in him? Why hadn't she been afraid when he approached? And more disturbingly, how had a simple refusal of his money shaken his convictions so deeply? His entire life had been built on the belief that every problem had a price, that you just had to offer the right amount. And now, a 5-year-old child with a tattered bear had challenged that fundamental truth. He went back to bed, but sleep remained distant. His thoughts returned obsessively to the street, to the girl sitting on the sidewalk. What if she was still there? What if no one had found her? At 5 in the morning, Alan gave up on sleep. He took a long shower, trying to wash away the restlessness that consumed him. He dressed mechanically, choosing a dark grey suit that matched his mood. During breakfast, which he barely touched, he decided he would pass by the same spot on his way to the office, just to check. Just to make sure the girl had found her way home. Just to silence that inner voice that wouldn't leave him in peace. "To the office, quoi, sir?" James asked, as Alan got into the car. Alan hesitated. "No. Let's go to the same place as last night." The driver nodded, asking no questions. Years of service had taught him when his boss wasn't in the mood for conversation. The morning was grey, with the promise of rain. The streets were beginning to fill with morning traffic, hurried people walking with coffee cups in hand, faces hidden behind scarves and cell phones. When they reached the location of the previous day's meeting, Alan ordered James to stop. His eyes scanned the sidewalk, searching for the small figure. There was no one there. A confusing mix of relief and disappointment washed over him. She had probably found help, someone more compassionate than him, no doubt. "Wait here," he told James, getting out of the car. The cold wind cut his face as he walked along the same stretch of sidewalk. There was no sign of the girl or her teddy bear. Alan felt ridiculous, a businessman looking for a strange child, as if it made any difference in his life. He looked around, searching for any trace of the little girl, but the sidewalk was empty, just the usual urban litter and hurried people passing by without noticing his presence. Alan stood there, motionless in the middle of the sidewalk, feeling an inexplicable emptiness. It was as if he had lost something important before he even had it. "To the office now, sir?" James asked when Alan returned to the car. Alan glanced one last time at the empty sidewalk. Yes, to the office. But throughout the entire drive, his thoughts remained with the green-eyed girl. Where could she be? Had she spent the night there? Had someone found her? The day dragged on through meetings and phone calls that seemed emptier than ever. Alan signed documents and made decisions on autopilot, while his mind wandered far away to a quiet street and a girl with green eyes. During a meeting with the finance team, he found himself staring at the profit spreadsheets with an unprecedented disinterest. Numbers, percentages, projections, he had always found comfort in that concrete, measurable data. Now they seemed cold and distant. "Mr. Mercer, is there a problem with the projections?" asked Sarah Chen, his chief analyst. Alan blinked, returning to reality. "Continue," he said curtly, trying to regain his focus. But the thought persisted. If money couldn't buy what that girl wanted, what else in his life couldn't he solve with his fortune? At night, in his apartment, he poured himself a whiskey and stared at the city from the window. Somewhere in that ocean of lights, there was a little girl with a tattered teddy bear. He tried to imagine where she might be now. Did she have a place to sleep? Someone to take care of her? Or was she still sitting on that sidewalk, hugging her bear, waiting for someone who would never come? The image was unbearable. For a moment, Alan saw the girl, Lily, as he called her in his thoughts, curled up in some dark corner of the city, shivering from the cold, her big green eyes fixed on the darkness. And he knew with a certainty that frightened him that he would return to that street the next day. The first rays of sun had barely touched the horizon when Alan opened his eyes. He didn't need the alarm. In fact, he had hardly slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the girl's face, those green eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. He sat up in bed and ran his hands over his face. 2 days. Just 2 days since he had first seen her, and he already felt as if something fundamental had changed inside him. It was irrational, incomprehensible. Alan Mercer, the man who controlled conglomerates with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, unable to get a strange child out of his thoughts. "How ridiculous," he muttered to himself as he walked to the bathroom. But as the hot water from the shower ran down his body, the decision was already made. He would go back, just to check, he told himself, just to make sure she was okay. It was the least any decent person would do. The mirror reflected the image of a man with dark circles under his eyes and a tense expression. No one at his office would recognize him like this, vulnerable, uncertain. He barely recognized himself. He dressed with less care than usual, dark jeans, a cotton shirt, a wool coat, clothes he rarely wore, saved for the rare weekends when he wasn't working. He didn't want to seem intimidating this time. "Good morning, sir," James greeted as Alan entered the kitchen. The butler frowned slightly upon seeing his employer dressed so casually. "Breakfast? Not today, James. I have an appointment." He left before the employee could ask any more questions. In the elevator, he mentally rehearsed what he would say to the girl when he saw her again. Ask about her family, offer to help find a relative. All the options seemed inadequate, insufficient. The doorman of the building also looked surprised at his clothes, but limited himself to wishing him a good day as Alan hurried past. He stopped at the first deli he found. He walked through the aisles, grabbing items without much thought. Bright red apples, grapes, bananas. A fresh Italian loaf, still warm. Milk in a glass bottle, chocolate chip cookies, strawberry jam. More than one child could possibly eat, but he couldn't stop. The cashier smiled as she rang up his purchases. "Special day." Alan nodded vaguely, without elaborating. A special day. He didn't even know how to define what he was doing. Carrying the bags, he walked through the streets that were beginning to fill with people rushing to work. It was a Tuesday morning, and for the first time in years, Alan Mercer was not in his office at 7:30 a.m. sharp. His phone vibrated in his pocket, probably Sarah Chen asking about the 9 a.m. meeting with the German investors. He ignored it. As he turned the corner onto the street where he had found the girl, his heart quickened. What if she wasn't there anymore? What if someone had found her? That would be better, of course. A child shouldn't spend the night on the street, but for some reason he couldn't explain, he wanted to be the one to help her. He slowed his pace. What was he doing, after all? He knew nothing about children. He had no paternal instincts, as Caroline had pointed out so many times. What could he offer this girl besides some fruit and bread? Then he saw her, sitting in the exact same spot, as if she hadn't moved since the previous afternoon. The same faded blue dress, the same thin coat, the same teddy bear hugged to her chest. Her hair seemed even more disheveled today, and her face was pale with small smudges of dirt on her cheeks. Alan stopped a few feet away, suddenly hesitant. The girl hadn't noticed his presence yet, lost in a silent conversation with her bear. He saw her whisper something into the toy's ear, then tilt her head as if listening for a response. It was then that she looked up and saw him. There was no surprise in her eyes, not joy, not fear, just a calm recognition, as if she had been waiting for him. Alan approached, holding the grocery bags like a makeshift shield. "Hi," he said, his voice softer than he had intended. "Hi," she replied, so quietly he almost didn't hear. He didn't know what to do next. He had rehearsed a few lines during the night, but they all seemed inadequate now that he was in front of her. He pointed to the empty space next to the girl on the sidewalk. "May I sit down?" She nodded, clutching her bear tighter. Alan placed the bags on the ground and sat down, keeping a respectful distance. Up close, he could see the details better. The loose stitching on the sleeve of her coat, the small tear at the hem of her dress, the worn-out shoes, signs of a difficult life for someone so young. "I brought some things to eat," he said, opening one of the bags. He took out an apple and offered it to her. "You must be hungry." The girl looked at the fruit with wide eyes but didn't reach for it. "It's okay," Alan assured her. "It's for you." She took the apple with small, hesitant fingers, as if it were something precious. She took a timid bite, and a small smile appeared on her face as the sweet taste touched her tongue. Alan felt a tightness in his chest. How long had it been since she had eaten properly? They sat in silence for a few minutes as she ate the apple, bite by bite, until only the core remained. Her eyes never left Alan's face, watching him with a disconcerting intensity. "Are you waiting for someone?" he finally asked, trying not to sound intrusive. The girl stopped chewing and looked down. There was such deep sadness in her face that Alan felt his heart clench. "I never had a dad," she answered in a small voice, almost a whisper. "Mommy got sick and went to heaven a little while ago." Her fingers squeezed the teddy bear tighter. "I stayed here because I have nowhere else to go." The silence that followed weighed like a sentence between them. Alan felt something break inside him, a barrier he didn't even know existed. This child had lost everything, and yet she faced the world with a silent dignity that many adults did not possess. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softened by restrained emotion. "Lily," she replied, confirming the name he had intuited. There was a musicality in the way she pronounced the two simple syllables. "Lily," Alan repeated, feeling the name familiar on his tongue as if he had known it for a long time. "I'm Alan." "Alan," she repeated carefully, testing the sound. "How old are you, Lily?" She held up 5 small fingers, saying nothing. "And your friend?" Alan pointed to the bear. A shy smile appeared on the girl's lips. "This is Mr. Brown, he's 7. 7? That's very old for a bear." "He belonged to my mommy when she was little," Lily explained, her eyes suddenly older than her 5 years. "Now he takes care of me." Alan looked around. The cold sidewalk, the indifferent passers-by, the sky threatening rain. A 5-year-old child couldn't stay here. But what could he do? Call social services and then, what, go back to his life as if nothing had happened? The idea caused an unexpected anguish. "Where did you sleep last night, Lily?" he asked, though he suspected the answer. She pointed to a gap between 2 buildings, a narrow opening protected by a small makeshift roof. "Mr. Brown doesn't like noise, so we stay there, it's quieter." Alan closed his eyes for a moment, trying to control the wave of emotion that washed over him. A 5-year-old child sleeping in an alley. A child who worried about the comfort of her teddy bear while facing complete abandonment. "Lily," he said finally, opening another bag, "do you like bread?" "I brought some warm bread." Her eyes lit up, and Alan felt a sharp pang in his chest. How could something so simple bring so much joy to someone who had lost so much? He broke the bread and offered her a piece, which she accepted with the same solemn gratitude as before. As she ate, Alan watched the people passing by. No one stopped. No one asked why a child was sitting alone on the sidewalk for days. The world went on its course, indifferent to small tragedies. "Do you have any family, Lily? Any uncles, aunts, grandparents?" She shook her head. "It was just Mommy and Mr. Brown." "And where did you live before?" Lily pointed vaguely to the east. "Far away. In a small house. But the mean man said we had to leave." Alan understood. Eviction. Probably after the mother's death, when the rent stopped being paid. "How long have you been here, on this sidewalk?" Lily shrugged. "Many days. First, I waited for Mommy to come back, but Mr. Brown said she's not coming back from heaven." The simplicity of the sentence hid an unimaginable pain. Alan felt his eyes burn and looked away, pretending to watch the traffic. A group of executives walked past them, smartphones in hand, talking loudly about stocks and mergers, the world Alan had inhabited until 2 days ago. None of them seemed to notice the child on the sidewalk or the man beside her, just as he wouldn't have noticed before. The revelation hit him hard. Before seeing Lily, how many other children like her had he ignored? How many people in need had become invisible to him, mere shadows on the periphery of his busy, comfortable existence? Lily finished the bread and looked at Alan with attentive eyes. There was an ancient wisdom in that gaze, an acceptance of life that no child should possess. "Are you leaving now?" she asked, her voice neutral, without accusation or expectation. Alan felt the weight of that simple question. It was what people did in her life. They left. Her mother had left forever. Everyone else walked by without a glance. She expected the same from him. He looked around again. The cold sidewalk, the indifferent buildings, the darkening sky promising rain. He felt the cold wind cut his face and imagined what it would be like for a small child to spend another night out here. The decision crystallized within him with surprising clarity. There was no other option, really. Maybe there never had been since the moment his eyes first met hers. From his car parked nearby, Alan retrieved a wool blanket he kept in the trunk for emergencies. He returned to Lily and knelt before her. "Lily," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "you're not going to sleep here anymore." The girl looked at him without surprise, as if she had been expecting this. Not with hope, but with the same calm acceptance with which she seemed to face all the events of her short, difficult life. "Where am I going to sleep?" "In a warm bed, with blankets and pillows," he replied, gently wrapping her in the wool blanket. "Mr. Brown, too." She clutched the bear to her chest. "He might get scared in new places. We'll take care of him too, don't worry." Alan held out his hand, hoping she would take it. Lily looked at the outstretched hand, then at his face, as if searching for something in his eyes. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her. She placed her small hand in his, the trust in that simple gesture, nearly demolishing the defenses Alan had built for so long. He picked her up, surprised at how light she was, as if she weighed nothing, as if she could be carried away by the wind at any moment. He wrapped her carefully in the blanket, making sure the bear was secure in her arms. Lily said nothing as he carried her to the car, just watched his face with those attentive green eyes. There was no fear, no resistance, just a silent acceptance that broke Alan's heart. James got out of the car and opened the back door, his eyes widening at the sight of the child in his employer's arms, but years of professional discretion kept him from making any comment. "Home, James?" Alan instructed as he settled Lily in the back seat. "And slowly, please." The girl looked out the window with fascination as the car began to move, as if she had never been in such a luxurious vehicle. She probably never had. "Do you live far away?" she asked, her small voice filling the space between them. "So not too far," Alan replied, watching how her eyes absorbed every detail of the car's interior. "Are you comfortable?" She nodded, clutching Mr. Brown to her chest. "He says yes, too." Alan smiled, a genuine smile that felt rusty from disuse. "I'm glad." The phone vibrated again in his pocket. Once again, he ignored it. The business world would have to wait. As the car glided through the morning traffic, Alan watched Lily's face. There was something mesmerizing in the way she looked at the world, with wonder, but also with a wisdom that seemed too old for her years. What was he doing? The question echoed in his mind. He had broken every rule of common sense. He had taken a strange child to his home without involving the authorities, without background checks, without a plan. He, Alan Mercer, the man who never took a step without calculating all possible variables, and yet, sitting next to that small figure wrapped in the blanket, he felt a deep certainty that he was doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing. "Tara, do you have other bears at your house?" Lily asked, breaking the silence. "No," Alan answered honestly, "but we can get some, if you'd like, to keep Mr. Brown company." She thought for a moment, tilting her head as if consulting the bear. "He says maybe a rabbit would be nice." "He's never had a rabbit, friend." "A rabbit sounds perfect," Alan agreed, feeling a wave of tenderness he hadn't experienced in years. As they approached his building on Fifth Avenue, Alan realized his life had changed irrevocably. Nothing would be the same. The meetings, the contracts, the negotiations, it all seemed to belong to another life, a life that now seemed empty and pointless. He looked at Lily, who had fallen asleep with her head resting against the leather upholstery. Mr. Brown held firmly in her small arms. Her face in sleep looked even younger, more vulnerable. The small worry lines that marked her forehead when she was awake had disappeared, leaving only the serene face of a child who was now, by some twist of fate, under his care. The car stopped in front of the imposing building where Alan lived. James got out to open the door, but Alan gestured for him to wait. He didn't want to wake Lily just yet. For a moment, he just watched her sleep, feeling an emotion he couldn't name. It was as if something that had been dormant inside him for a long time was finally awakening, something he had suppressed and denied his entire adult life. Careful not to disturb her, Alan picked her up in his arms. She barely stirred, exhausted after what had likely been days of irregular and insufficient sleep. "Sir," James began, clearly wanting to ask about the unusual situation, but holding back. "It's all right, James," Alan assured him, his voice soft so as not to wake Lily. "Please prepare the guest room, with extra blankets, and see if we have anything a child can eat for lunch." The butler nodded, clearing the way for Alan as he carried the sleeping girl to the elevator. In the silent apartment, Alan walked carefully to the guest room that had never been used. He laid Lily on the large bed, still wrapped in the blanket, Mr. Brown secure in her arms even in sleep. He stood there watching her for a long moment, the brown hair spread on the white pillow, the small freckles on her nose, the long eyelashes against her cheeks, so small, so fragile, and now, somehow, his responsibility. "What am I doing?" he whispered to himself, but he already knew the answer. He was doing what he should have done a long time ago, listening to that part of him Caroline said didn't exist, the part that could care about something other than contracts and profits. With a final glance at the sleeping figure, Alan left the room, leaving the door ajar. He had calls to make, arrangements to plan, but for now, all that mattered was that Lily was safe, warm, and would no longer have to sleep on the cold sidewalk. The rest, they would figure out together. The elevator ascended silently to the top floor of the elegant Fifth Avenue building. When the doors opened, Alan stepped out carrying Lily in his arms, still wrapped in the blanket. She had woken up during the ride and was now observing everything with wide eyes, clutching Mr. Brown as if he were her shield. "This is my home," Alan said softly, setting her down carefully. Lily took 2 hesitant steps and stopped, clearly intimidated by the grandeur of the apartment. Her green eyes scanned the spacious rooms, the sophisticated furniture, the works of art on the walls. The penthouse, which Alan had always considered merely functional, now seemed excessively large and cold through her eyes. "It's very big," Lily whispered, as if afraid her voice might break something. "Oh yes, I suppose it is," he agreed, realizing for the first time how impersonal the place was, designed to impress, not to welcome. Lily followed him with cautious steps as he showed her the living room, the kitchen, and finally the hallway leading to the bedrooms. She moved like a little ghost, almost silently, observing every detail with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. "You must be hungry," Alan commented, suddenly aware that he had little experience with children. "What did they eat? What did they like?" Lily just shrugged, still hugging Mr. Brown tightly. "Let's get you a place to sleep first, and then we can get something to eat," he decided. He led her to the guest room, a spacious room that had never been used. The king-size bed seemed absurdly large for such a small child. Alan quickly improvised, placing extra pillows to make the space less intimidating and spreading soft blankets over the formal comforter. He turned on the lamp on the nightstand, giving the room a soft, welcoming glow. He partially opened the curtains, revealing the city's night view, an ocean of lights stretching as far as the eye could see. "This is where you'll sleep," he explained. "So what do you think? Lily entered the room timidly, her eyes scanning every detail as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. She hesitantly touched the soft bedspread, then looked at Alan with genuine surprise. "Is this all for me?" The question, asked with such innocence, hit Alan like a physical blow. How many things did he take for granted that seemed like unbelievable luxuries to this child? "Yes," he replied, his voice a bit hoarse. "All for you, and for Mr. Brown too, of course." Lily hugged the bear tighter, and for the first time since he had met her, Alan saw a small smile form on her lips. He then realized she was trembling slightly, still dressed in clothes inadequate for the cold. He adjusted the thermostat to raise the temperature and improvised with what he had. A clean t-shirt served as a nightgown, completely swallowing her small body. After a warm bath and a simple meal of soup that he managed to prepare, Lily could barely keep her eyes open. Alan helped her into the large bed, tucking her in carefully with the blankets. "If you need anything during the night, just call me," he instructed, pointing to his own room across the hall. "I'll be right there." Lily nodded sleepily. Mr. Brown held firmly against her chest. "Good night, Lily." "Good night, Alan," she murmured, already nearly asleep. "Good night, Mr. Brown." Alan left the lamp on at its dimmest setting and slipped out quietly, leaving the door ajar. In his own room, he lay in bed, physically and emotionally exhausted, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind was buzzing with questions and worries. What was he doing? He knew nothing about children, he had never wanted them. And now he had an orphan girl sleeping in the room next door. Should he contact social services in the morning? It was the correct legal procedure. But the thought of turning Lily over to the system made his stomach churn. An hour passed, then 2. Alan finally got up and, moved by an impulse he couldn't explain, walked silently to Lily's room. He opened the door carefully and peeked inside. She was sleeping soundly, with Mr. Brown still in her arms. Her face seemed even younger in sleep. The small worry lines that marked her forehead when awake now softened. Alan entered and sat in the armchair near the bed, watching the gentle rhythm of her breathing. And so he remained, like a silent guardian, watching over her sleep through the early morning hours. Occasionally, Lily would stir or murmur something incomprehensible, and he would lean forward, attentive, ready for what? He didn't know exactly. He just felt he needed to be there. When the first rays of sun began to creep through the curtains, Alan realized he had spent the entire night in the armchair. His back ached and his neck was stiff, but there was a strange sense of peace inside him. He stood up silently, intending to return to his room before Lily woke up. That's when he noticed something different. She was restless, moving under the covers. He approached and lightly touched her forehead. It was hot, very hot. "Lily," he called softly. She opened her eyes, which seemed glazed and distant. Her cheeks were flushed, and small beads of sweat formed on her forehead. "I don't feel well," she murmured, her voice weak. Panic seized Alan. A fever. The girl had a fever. What should he do? He had never taken care of anyone in his life. His entire existence had been dedicated to avoiding this exact kind of responsibility. He ran to the bathroom and returned with a thermometer. 102.5 degrees, 39.2 degrees. Too high. His heart raced. He grabbed his phone and called his private doctor, explaining the situation in rushed words. "Bring her in immediately, or I can send someone," Dr. Winters offered. "Send someone, please," Alan requested, looking at Lily, who seemed too fragile to be moved. While he waited, he dampened a cloth with cool water and placed it gently on Lily's forehead. She shivered at the contact but then sighed faintly. "Is this okay?" he asked, uncertainly. She nodded, her eyes half closed. "Mummy used to do this," she murmured. The mention of her mother made Alan swallow hard. How could he possibly replace the maternal care she had lost? The doctor arrived in record time. He examined Lily with gentle, efficient gestures, listening to her heart and lungs, checking her throat and ears. A mild infection, he finally diagnosed, likely a result of exposure to the cold and a weakened immune system, Nothing serious, but we need to treat it properly. Relief washed over Alan like a physical wave. What should I do? The doctor prescribed antibiotics and fever reducers, giving instructions on dosages and schedules. Keep her hydrated, continue with the cool compresses and lots of rest. If the fever doesn't break in 24 hours, call me. After the doctor left, Alan organized the medications and returned to Lily's side. The day passed slowly as he changed the compresses, offered water in small sips, and administered the medicine at precise times. He cancelled all his meetings, something he had never done before, and remained by her side, watching every small change in her condition. The hours dragged on. Lily alternated between periods of restless sleep and brief moments of consciousness, when she would look at Alan with eyes clouded by fever. "You're still here," she murmured once, clearly surprised. "Of course I am," he replied, adjusting the blanket around her. "I'm not going anywhere." In the late afternoon, the fever began to subside. Alan could feel the difference when he touched her forehead, still warm, but not burning like before. Her cheeks were less red and her breathing seemed calmer. As the sun began to set, Lily opened her eyes completely for the first time that day. Her gaze was clearer, more present. "Alan, I'm here," he answered, leaning in so she could see him better. Lily reached out a small hand and placed it on his. "Thank you for not leaving me alone," she whispered. Something inside Alan broke with those simple words. A lump formed in his throat, and for a moment he couldn't respond. He just covered her small hand with his. "Never," he finally promised, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I will never leave you alone, Lily." She smiled, a weak but real smile, before her eyes began to close again. This time, however, it wasn't the restless sleep of fever, but the peaceful rest of recovery. When she woke up a few hours later, Lily was visibly better. She managed to eat a little soup and even asked for more water on her own. "Do you want me to tell you a story?" Alan asked, noticing how she was fighting sleep. Lily nodded, her eyes lighting up. "Mr. Brown wants one too," she added, hugging the bear. Alan hesitated. He didn't have any children's books at home. He'd never needed them. His personal library consisted only of economics volumes, biographies of great businessmen, and a few classics he'd bought more to impress visitors than to read. "Let me think of a story," he said, searching his memory. He vaguely remembered tales his mother used to tell him when he was little, before everything in his life changed. He cleared his throat and began, "Once upon a time, there were 3 bears who lived in a house in the forest." He improvised the story of Goldilocks, changing his voice for each character. To his surprise, the words came naturally, as if they had been stored away somewhere for a long time. Lily laughed at his portrayal of Papa Bear, a crystal-clear sound that Alan realized he had never heard from her before. When he finished, she asked for another. Alan smiled and began the story of Little Red Riding Hood, then the 3 little pigs. He told stories until his voice grew hoarse, until her eyes began to close, until Mr. Brown slipped from her arms, relaxed by sleep. He adjusted the blanket around her, gently placed the bear back in her arms, and checked her temperature one last time. Almost normal. He turned off the tablet and dimmed the lamp, but he didn't leave the room. He sat down again in the armchair, preparing for another night of vigil. But this time, watching Lily's serene face, he didn't feel the weight of duty or worry. He felt something different, something he had forgotten what it was like. He felt needed, not for his money or his power, but simply for being there, for being the person who wouldn't leave her alone. And, for the first time in many years, Alan Mercer fell asleep with a smile on his lips. Spring arrived in the city, bringing a breath of new life. 2 weeks had passed since Lily had entered Alan's life, transforming his once silent apartment into a home. The girl's recovery had been quick after that first night of fever, and gradually, a routine began to establish itself between them. On that Sunday morning, the sun streamed generously through the large windows of the apartment. Alan was making pancakes in the kitchen, a newfound skill that, to his surprise, wasn't as difficult as he had imagined. Lily sat at the table, swinging her legs that didn't reach the floor, watching him intently while Mr. Brown, faithfully propped against a glass, supervised the process. "Do you think Mr. Brown will like pancakes with chocolate syrup?" Alan asked, flipping the batter in the pan with a movement that was already gaining confidence. "He prefers them with honey," Lily replied seriously, "but he said he can try chocolate today." Alan smiled. Her imagination charmed him. Slowly, Lily was beginning to open up, to show glimpses of the child she would be under normal circumstances. There were still moments of sadness, of course. Sometimes he would catch her looking out the window with an expression no 5-year-old should have, but there were also smiles, more and more frequent, and even some laughter that was like music to his ears. He placed the pancakes on a plate and sat at the table with her. He watched with satisfaction as Lily picked up her fork and began to eat with appetite. Her face had regained its color, and her green eyes no longer carried the dullness of the first few days. "Is it good?" he asked, although the answer was obvious from her full cheeks and syrupy smile. Lily nodded vigorously. "You cook better than before," she declared with the brutal honesty typical of children. Alan laughed. "Practice, I guess. Or maybe I'm learning from my mistakes." A comfortable silence settled as they ate. Alan realized that these simple moments had become his favorite. Just the two of them, without the pressure of the outside world, without the complications they would inevitably have to face. He still hadn't contacted social services. He knew he should, that the current situation existed in a kind of legal limbo, but with each passing day, it became harder to consider the idea of Lily being anywhere but here, with him. "Alan," the small voice interrupted his thoughts. "Yes," Lily put her fork down on the plate, assuming a serious expression that made her seem curiously adult. "Why do you live alone?" The question caught him off guard. It was direct, simple, yet loaded with complexity. How could he explain to a child the choices and circumstances that had led him to a life of voluntary isolation? Alan took a deep breath, setting his own fork aside. He realized he owed her an honest answer, not a softened or evasive version. "It's a bit of a long story," he began, unsure of how to proceed. "We have time," Lily replied with a wisdom beyond her years, looking at him expectantly. Alan smiled faintly. "Yes, I guess we do." He took a sip of coffee, organizing his thoughts. "Well, for starters, I never knew my father. Never. He left before I was even born." Lily's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing, just waited for him to continue. "My mother and I lived in a small apartment in the Bronx. She worked 2 jobs to support us. It was hard for her." Alan didn't usually talk about his past, but the words flowed with surprising ease. "She got sick when I was 12. Cancer. She tried to fight, but—" His voice wavered slightly. "She passed away when I was 14. Lily looked at him with an intensity that was almost palpable, her green eyes fixed on him, absorbing every word. "I went to live with my aunt after that. She wasn't a bad person, but she had her own problems, her own kids. I was an extra burden, I think. So I studied hard, got scholarships. I worked hard to build my own life." Alan paused, realizing he was telling more than he had initially planned. But there was something liberating in sharing these truths with Lily, perhaps because she, in some way, understood loss in a way many adults couldn't. "When I grew up, I had a few relationships, some important people. There was a woman, Caroline, and whom I almost married, but I guess I never really knew how to make things work, how to really let someone in." "Did she leave?" Lily asked quietly. Alan nodded. "Yes, she wanted children, a family. I was too focused on work, on my career. I couldn't imagine myself as a father." The irony was not lost on him. After her, there were other people, but nothing that lasted. Over time, I think I got used to being alone. It was simpler, less complicated. Lily lowered her head, absorbing everything he had said. Her small fingers played with the edge of the placemat. When she finally looked up, there was an understanding in her eyes that pierced Alan like an arrow. "I think you were lonely just like me," she murmured. 5 simple words, yet they held a truth so profound that Alan felt a lump in his throat. In his business, he was known for his insight, for seeing connections others missed. But it took a 5-year-old child to see the fundamental truth of his existence, that his entire adult life had been an elaborate defense against the abandonment he had felt in childhood. He couldn't respond with words. He just nodded, looking into her eyes. A moment of silent understanding stretched between them, 2 lonely souls who, by some whim of fate, had found each other. It was Lily who broke the silence, picking up Mr. Brown and hugging him. "I think Mr. Brown really liked the pancakes," she said, changing the subject with the naturalness only children possess. Alan smiled, grateful for the cue. "I'm glad he enjoyed them." The rest of the day passed quietly. They watched an animated movie that Alan had downloaded, his first experience with children's entertainment since his own childhood. Later, he took Lily to the park, where she watched other children play with a mixture of fascination and shyness. But that conversation at the breakfast table stayed with Alan. In the evening, after putting Lily to bed and telling her another improvised story, he sat in his office, contemplating what to do next. The truth he had been avoiding was now inescapable. He didn't want Lily to leave. He couldn't imagine his apartment without her, his days without the sound of her small footsteps, her curious questions, her presence that somehow made everything more alive, more meaningful. The next morning, he made a decision. If Lily was going to stay, and in his heart, he already knew that's what he wanted, he needed to make changes. The guest room, functional but austere, was no place for a child to grow up. The apartment, designed for a career-focused bachelor, lacked the essential elements for child development. He called Sarah, his assistant, and cancelled all his meetings for the day. For the first time in his career, something was more important than business. "They were going to have a surprise," he told Lily after breakfast. "What's your favorite color?" "Pink," she replied promptly, "and blue, and yellow, and green." Alan laughed. "Then we'll need all of those colors." The day was an adventure neither of them would forget. They visited children's furniture stores, toy stores, clothing stores. Alan, the man who used to deliberate for weeks over financial investments, now made quick, enthusiastic decisions about castle-shaped beds, colorful bookshelves, and star-shaped lamps. Lily, initially shy in the stores, gradually became more animated. Her eyes sparkled at the possibilities, and each small "can I really choose" both broke and mended Alan's heart simultaneously. "It's all for you," he would reply repeatedly. "Choose whatever you want." By the end of the day, the guest room was transformed. The walls, now adorned with stickers of trees and butterflies, seemed more alive. The new bed, appropriately sized for a child, had a pink canopy that Lily had chosen with sparkling eyes. Low shelves displayed colorful books and carefully selected toys. A soft little rug covered part of the floor, creating a cozy area for playing. Lily was ecstatic. She ran from one side to the other, examining each new item, hugging her new stuffed animals, though none, she assured Mr. Brown, would ever replace his special place, and flipping through picture books. In the days that followed, Alan watched in amazement as Lily began to transform. It was as if the new room, new clothes, new toys, all symbols of permanence, of belonging, had unlocked something inside her. She started drawing, filling sheets of paper with colorful figures of people, houses, trees. Sometimes, she would hum quietly while she played, simple melodies Alan didn't recognize. Her smiles came more easily. Her questions became more frequent. But there was a reality he could no longer ignore. He needed to get back to work. Mercer Enterprises couldn't run indefinitely without its CEO, no matter how competent his team was. The work-from-home conference calls and late-night emails were only temporary solutions. "I can't stay home every day, Lily," he explained carefully one evening as he tucked her into bed. "So I have to go back to the office." Her eyes widened with alarm. "Will I be alone?" "No, of course not," he hurried to assure her. I'm thinking of finding someone special to stay with you when I'm not here. Someone nice, who knows how to take care of children, who can play with you." Lily considered this for a moment, hugging Mr. Brown. "Like a nanny?" "Exactly. A nanny," she nodded slowly. "Mr. Brown says that's okay, as long as she likes bears." Alan smiled, relieved by her initial acceptance. "I'll make sure she loves bears." Finding the right person was no easy task. Alan personally interviewed each candidate with a rigor that surpassed even his interviews for high-level executives. The chosen one, Eleanor Dawson, was a middle-aged woman with decades of experience and impeccable references. She had a kind smile and a calm demeanor that seemed to please Lily immediately, especially when she passed the Mr. Brown test, treating the worn-out bear with the respect he obviously deserved. Still, when the first day came that he had to leave Lily, Alan felt an anxiety he had never experienced before. In the elevator on his way down to the ground floor, he almost pushed the button to go back several times. At the office, he couldn't concentrate. His mind constantly wandered back to the apartment, wondering what Lily was doing, if she was sad, if she felt he had abandoned her. He called home 3 times before lunch, to Eleanor's poorly concealed amusement. "She's fine, Mr. Mercer," the nanny assured him on the 3rd call. "Right now, she's drawing a very interesting picture that I believe is you dressed as a superhero." The hours dragged on endlessly. Alan ended his last meeting 30 minutes early, to the shock of his team, and practically ran to the elevator. When the door to his apartment opened, he was greeted by a sound he had never heard before. Lily's pure, joyful laughter coming from the living room. For a brief, irrational moment, he felt a pang of jealousy. Was she having fun without him? But then she saw him. "Alan," she shouted, and the sound of her small feet running down the hallway dispelled any insecurity. Lily threw herself into his arms with an abandon she had never shown before, hugging him with surprising strength for someone so small. "You came back," she said against his shoulder. "Of course I came back," he replied, holding her tightly. "I will always come back for you." In that moment, holding Lily in his arms, feeling her small heart beat against his, Alan knew with absolute certainty there was no going back. This child, who had appeared in his life by chance, had become the most important person in his world. After Eleanor left, after Lily showed him all the drawings she had made during the day, after dinner and bath time and the nightly story, Alan sat in the dark of his office, contemplating the future. He picked up the phone and dialed the number of Lawrence Goldstein, his personal lawyer for over a decade. "Larry, it's Alan. I know it's late, but I need you to research something for me. I want to know exactly what is required to legally adopt a child." When he hung up, he felt simultaneously terrified and more at peace than he had ever been. The decision was made. He wanted to be Lily's father. He wanted to give her not just a roof and food, but a home, a family, everything they had both lost. The path wouldn't be easy. He knew that. There would be obstacles, investigations, bureaucracy, but Alan Mercer hadn't built an empire by backing down from challenges, and no deal, no acquisition, no contract had ever been as important as this. He looked at the drawing Lily had made that morning, now lying on his desk, a colorful representation of 2 stick figures, one large and one small, holding hands, with a small brown bear beside them. "We'll do it," he promised the silent image. "We're going to be a family." The days following Alan's decision were filled with frantic activity. Lawrence Goldstein, his lawyer, had mobilized an entire team to begin the adoption process. Forms were filled out, documents were gathered, and a thorough investigation into Lily's past was initiated. "We need to find any official documents about her," Larry explained during a meeting in his office. "Her birth certificate, medical records, information about her mother." Alan nodded, aware of the complexity of the process. "And what about the fact that I took her in without contacting the authorities immediately?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses, choosing his words carefully. "I won't lie, Alan, that complicates things. But we have in our favor the fact that you provided a stable home for an abandoned child, sought medical assistance when necessary, and are now taking the appropriate legal steps. Will I lose custody of her during the process? We will do everything possible to avoid that. I've managed to schedule a preliminary home evaluation with a social worker later this week. That will give us a tactical advantage. Alan returned home that day with a mix of hope and apprehension. He found Lily and Eleanor in the living room, engrossed in a large jigsaw puzzle spread out on the rug. The girl's face lit up when she saw him, as it always did now. "Alan, we're building a castle," he smiled, sitting on the floor beside them. "So I see you're doing a great job." Eleanor discreetly stood up. "I'll go make some tea," she said, giving them some privacy. Lily pushed some pieces in his direction. "You do the sky, it's the hardest part." Alan picked up the blue pieces, studying them with the same concentration he devoted to the most complex contracts. He watched Lily as she worked, her little tongue peeking out from the corner of her mouth in a sign of absolute concentration. His heart ached at the thought of what was to come, the investigations, the hearings, the uncertainties. "Lily," he began hesitantly, "do you remember your mother's full name?" The girl paused, looking at a puzzle piece in her hands. "Rose. Mommy's name was Rose Parker. And do you know if you had other relatives, maybe uncles or grandparents?" Lily frowned thoughtfully. "There was Aunt Margie, but Mommy said she lived very far away." Alan carefully absorbed the information. "Margie? Margaret, perhaps?" "I think so," Lily replied, turning her attention back to the puzzle. "I never met her. Mommy got sad when she talked about her." He didn't press further. The information, though vague, would be useful to Larry. After Lily went to sleep, Alan called the lawyer and relayed what he had discovered. "It's a start," Larry said. "I'll include this in the searches." In the following days, the apartment was meticulously prepared for the social worker's visit. Eleanor helped organize everything, ensuring the house was spotless and suitable for a child. Lily's room, colorful and cozy, was Alan's greatest pride, a physical testament to his commitment to her. Patricia Winters, the social worker assigned to the case, was a woman in her 50s, with short grey hair and sharp eyes that seemed to notice every detail. She spent 2 hours inspecting the apartment, talking to Alan about his intentions, his career, his ability to care for a child. "Mr. Mercer, I need to be frank," she said, as they sat in the living room after the inspection. "This is a highly unusual situation. The standard procedure would have been to contact social services immediately upon finding an abandoned minor." "I know," Alan admitted, "but there was something about her. I couldn't just turn her over to the system." Patricia studied him for a moment. "I understand your impulse to protect her, but protocols exist for a reason, and I'm following all of them now," and he argued. "I want to do this the right way. Lily deserves stability, security." The social worker made notes on her clipboard. "Your financial situation is clearly adequate, and the physical environment is exemplary. But raising a child involves much more than that, Mr. Mercer. It involves sacrifice, patience, emotional availability." "I'm prepared for that," Alan stated with conviction. "Lily has already changed my life completely, and for the better." When Patricia finally left, after a brief private conversation with Lily, Alan felt that the visit had gone well. Larry, when informed, agreed. "Winters has a good reputation. If she issues a favorable report, we'll have a significant advantage in the preliminary hearing." The days turned into weeks. The routine with Lily solidified, bringing a normality that Alan had never imagined possible in his life, previously ordered exclusively by work. Now there were drawings on the refrigerator, toys occasionally scattered around the living room, nightly stories, and endless questions about how the world worked. The adoption process moved slowly, but with promising signs of success. Patricia Winters's report had been positive, highlighting the evident bond between Alan and Lily, as well as the quality of the environment he provided. On that Thursday morning, Alan was in his office reviewing contracts when the phone rang. Seeing Larry's name on the caller ID, he answered immediately. "Were any news?" "Alan." The hesitation in the lawyer's voice made his stomach sink. "I received a call from Patricia Winters. There's a..." Complication. He sat up straight in his chair, suddenly alert. What kind of complication? Mr. Mercer. Patricia's voice came on the line, indicating a conference call. Someone has come forward claiming to be a close relative of Lily's mother. The words hit Alan like a physical blow. His hand gripped the phone so tightly, his knuckles turned white. What relative? He managed to ask, his voice strangely calm despite the storm brewing inside him. A sister of the mother, Margaret Parker. She has presented documentation proving the relationship and has expressed interest in taking custody of her niece, Margaret, Aunt Margie. The person Lily had mentioned, whom she had never met. Alan's world seemed to crumble in slow motion. And what kind of person is she? Where has she been all this time while Lily was abandoned on the street? Mr. Mercer, I understand your frustration. Patricia's voice remained professional, but not without empathy. We are in the process of investigating Mrs. Parker and the circumstances that prevented her from being present in her niece's life previously. For now, I cannot provide further details. Alan closed his eyes, trying to control the wave of panic that was washing over him. Does this mean they're going to take Lily from me? We're not at that stage yet. A hearing will be scheduled to evaluate both claims. Until then, considering the established bond and my preliminary report, Lily will remain in your care. After the call, Alan remained motionless in his chair, unable to fully process what had happened. Larry tried to reassure him, promising to use every legal resource available, but his words seemed to come from far away. A relative, a biological aunt. Someone with a blood tie he could never claim. Alan? Sarah, his assistant, appeared at the door, concern evident on her face. Is everything all right? You're pale. He stood up abruptly. I need to go home. Cancel my appointments for the rest of the day. Throughout the drive, his mind churned with questions and fears. What if this Margaret Parker won custody? What if she took Lily far away? What if all the moments, all the stories, all the shared smiles were just a temporary interlude in their lives? The apartment was quiet when he arrived. Eleanor had taken Lily to the park, enjoying the sunny day. Alan walked to the girls' room, now so full of life and personality. The mural of drawings on the wall, the colorful books on the shelf, Mr. Brown sitting in his place of honor on the bed, every detail was a reminder of how much she had become an essential part of his existence. He picked up one of the drawings, a house with stick figures representing him, Lily, and even Eleanor, all smiling under a bright yellow sun. Our family, read the caption in the uneven handwriting of a child learning to write. Family. The word that had never held real meaning in his adult life was now all that mattered. When Lily and Eleanor returned, Alan did his best to hide his concern. He spent the afternoon playing with her, more present than ever, savoring every laugh, every question, every shared moment as if it could be the last. At night, after telling not one, but 3 bedtime stories, Alan remained seated beside the bed, watching Lily fall asleep. Her small face relaxed in sleep, her brown hair spread across the pillow. Mr. Brown held firmly against her chest, the most precious sight he had ever seen. I won't let them take you, he whispered, a fierce promise in the silent darkness. I will fight for you with everything I have. I will fight for us. In that moment, sitting in the room of a child who had entered his life by chance, Alan Mercer, the man who had built an empire with relentless determination, made a silent oath. For Lily, he would face the entire world if necessary. For this unlikely family they had formed, he would move mountains. Because some battles, he realized, were worth any sacrifice. The morning of the hearing arrived with a grey sky that seemed to reflect Alan's state of mind. He had barely slept, spending most of the night tossing and turning, imagining all the possible outcomes of the day ahead. Eleanor had arrived early, prepared to stay with Lily while Alan met with Larry for final preparations. But after dressing the girl in her favorite blue dress and carefully combing her brown hair, Alan made a decision. I want her to come with me, he told the nanny. Just not for the entire hearing, but to be present if the judge wants to speak with her. Eleanor nodded understandingly. That's a good idea. I can wait with her in the anteroom until she's needed." Alan knelt before Lily, who was nervously stroking the ear of Mr. Brown, her faithful companion. "Today we're going to an important place," he explained in a soft voice. "A place where a very serious man, called a judge, is going to talk with me about you staying here with me forever." Lily's green eyes widened slightly. "For real forever?" "For real forever," he confirmed, trying to keep his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "But he might want to talk to you too, just to know if you're happy here." Lily nodded solemnly. "I'll tell him I'm very happy. And Mr. Brown is too." Alan smiled, stroking her hair. "I know you will. Now let's go. We have to meet Larry." Lawrence Goldstein was waiting for them on the courthouse steps, impeccable in his dark suit, a leather briefcase under his arm. His usually impassive face softened when he saw Lily. "Good morning, Miss Lily," he greeted, bowing slightly. "What a beautiful dress." She smiled shyly, partially hiding behind Alan's leg. Over the past few days, Larry had visited the apartment several times to prepare the case, and Lily was already used to his presence. "Any news?" Alan asked quietly as they climbed the stairs. "Margaret Parker arrived 20 minutes ago with her lawyer," Larry informed him. "She seems presentable. No obvious signs of problems we could exploit." Alan felt a tightness in his chest. Part of him had hoped this mysterious aunt wouldn't show up, or that she would have some glaring flaw that would disqualify her immediately. The reality was going to be more complicated. Inside the courthouse, Eleanor took Lily to the anteroom as planned, while Alan and Larry headed to the hearing room. It was a smaller, less formal space than Alan had imagined, with dark wood paneling and high windows that let in the grey daylight. And there she was, Margaret Parker, a woman in her early 40s with brown hair like Lily's, dressed simply but neatly. There was no hostility in her posture, just a palpable tension and something Alan recognized immediately: sadness. Their eyes met briefly, and Alan was surprised not to feel the resentment he had expected. This woman was not a villain in his story. She was just someone who, like him, was connected to Lily by circumstances neither of them had planned. Judge Raymond Hoffman entered the room, a man in his 60s with grey hair and a serious, but not severe, expression. After the initial formalities, the hearing began with Patricia Winters presenting a summary of the case. "Your Honor, we have an unusual situation here," she began. Lily Parker, 5 years old, lost her mother, Rose Parker, approximately 3 months ago. With no other known relatives present, the child was effectively abandoned. Mr. Alan Mercer found her by chance, and instead of immediately contacting the authorities, took her into his home. Alan tensed, but Larry had prepared him for this part. It was necessary for all the facts to be presented. "Since then," Patricia continued, "Mr. Mercer has provided a stable home, adequate medical care, and emotional support for the child. My evaluation indicates a strong and healthy bond between them. Recently, however, Margaret Parker, the sister of the deceased mother, has come forward claiming family ties to Lily." The judge nodded, absorbing the information. "Counselors, your opening statements, please." Margaret's lawyer, a younger man named Daniel Griffin, stood up first. "Your Honor, we acknowledge that Mr. Mercer has taken good care of the child in the recent period. However, we argue that biological family ties should take precedence, especially when the relative in question is a direct maternal aunt, capable and willing to assume responsibility for her niece. Margaret Parker was unaware of her sister's passing until recently due to a family estrangement, but she now wishes to fulfill her obligations as the closest relative." Larry was next, his voice calm and calculated. "Your Honor, Mr. Mercer has established a significant and deep relationship with Lily over the last 3 months. He has provided not only material necessities, but emotional stability at a time of great trauma for the child. Lily was effectively abandoned when she was found. The bond formed between them is undeniable, as attested by the social worker herself. The law recognizes that the child's well-being must be the paramount consideration, and we argue that keeping Lily with Mr. Mercer, who has already demonstrated commitment and the ability to provide proper care, is clearly in her best interest. Judge Hoffman adjusted his glasses and considered both arguments before addressing the two adults at the center of the dispute directly. Miss Parker, I would like to hear your personal account. Why have you only just now appeared in your niece's life? Margaret Parker stood, her hands trembling slightly. When she spoke, her voice was soft, with a hoarseness that suggested suppressed emotion. Your Honor, my sister and I grew apart almost 6 years ago. It was a complicated family argument about life choices. She paused, visibly struggling to maintain her composure. I moved to Seattle. We started new, separate lives. Rose was stubborn, and so was I. The years went by. She took a deep breath before continuing. I only recently found out she had passed away, through a mutual acquaintance who finally managed to track me down. I was devastated to learn that my niece, whom I never had the chance to meet, had been left all alone. A tear ran down Margaret's face, which she quickly wiped away. I didn't come here to cause more trauma. I just thought I should try to be present, to at least meet my niece. She's all I have left of my sister. The silence that followed her words was almost palpable. Alan felt an unexpected empathy for this woman, who was clearly also suffering a loss. Once again, their eyes met, and this time there was a mutual recognition of shared pain. Mr. Mercer, the judge turned to him. I would like to hear your words as well. Alan stood up, surprised to find his legs were steady despite the emotional storm inside him. Your Honor, finding Lily was the most unexpected and transformative event of my life. I didn't plan to become a father, especially not in this way. But from the moment she entered my life, everything changed. He paused, searching for the right words. I cannot claim biological rights. I cannot compete with blood ties. All I can say is that I love Lily as if she were my own daughter, and I will do anything to ensure her happiness and well-being. Judge Hoffman considered both testimonies with a thoughtful expression. I would like to speak with the child now, he decided. Eleanor brought Lily into the room. The girl seemed smaller than ever in the formal setting, clutching Mr. Brown to her chest as she looked around with wide eyes. When she saw Alan, she moved instinctively toward him, but Eleanor gently guided her to the chair in front of the judge. Hello, Lily, Judge Hoffman said, his voice remarkably softer. My name is Raymond. Do you know why you're here today? Lily nodded, her green eyes fixed on the man in the black robe. To find out if I can stay with Alan forever. That's right, the judge confirmed with a small smile. Are you happy living with Mr. Mercer? Yes, she answered without hesitation. But he tells stories and makes pancakes on Sundays and never yells, even when I spill juice on the carpet. A murmur of soft laughter rippled through the room, momentarily easing the tension. The judge then gently gestured toward Margaret. Lily, this lady is your mother's sister. She is your aunt. Do you remember your mother ever talking about her? Lily looked at Margaret for the first time, studying her with that peculiar intensity children sometimes have. Mommy used to talk about Aunt Margie sometimes, when she looked at old pictures. Margaret covered her mouth with her hand, clearly moved to hear the familiar nickname. How would you feel about getting to know your aunt better? The judge asked carefully. Lily shrank slightly in her chair, hugging Mr. Brown tighter. She looked at Alan, then at Margaret, and then back at the judge. When she spoke, her voice was small but surprisingly firm. I don't know her. I just want to stay with Alan. He's my daddy. The silence that followed her words dominated the room. Alan felt his heart painfully expand and contract in his chest. Daddy. She had never called him that before. Judge Hoffman looked at Lily for a long time, then at the two adults who wanted to care for her. Finally, he took a deep breath and sat up straight. Having heard all the testimonies and considering the report from the social worker, as well as the exceptional circumstances of this case, I am prepared to issue my ruling. Alan clasped his hands under the table, feeling as if the entire world was suspended in that moment. Klausen, while I acknowledge the validity of biological family ties, The law is clear in prioritizing the best interest of the child above all other considerations. Lily's emotional stability and her evident bond with Mr. Mercer are determining factors. The judge adjusted his glasses before continuing. Therefore, I grant full custody and adoption to Mr. Alan Mercer. The words echoed in the room, and for a moment Alan couldn't fully process their meaning. It was Lily's sudden movement that brought him back to reality. She jumped from her chair and ran towards him, throwing herself into his arms with surprising force. He lifted her, holding her tightly against his chest, feeling her small heart beating against his. Tears he couldn't control streamed down his face. "I love you, Daddy," Lily whispered in his ear, the simple words containing an entire universe of meaning. Alan closed his eyes, feeling the weight and lightness of that moment in equal measure. When he responded, his voice was choked with emotion. "I love you too, my daughter." Over Lily's shoulder, his eyes met Margaret's. To his surprise, there was no resentment in her gaze, only a melancholic acceptance and something that almost looked like relief. In that silent look, something was communicated between them, an understanding, perhaps even the beginning of a truce. Judge Hoffman banged his gavel, officially ending the hearing, but Alan barely heard it. In that moment, holding his daughter legally, officially, finally his daughter, the rest of the world had momentarily disappeared. The journey that had begun on a cold sidewalk with an unexpected question had reached its destination. Two lonely people had found each other, forming a family neither of them had planned, but which both now knew was absolutely right. The doorbell rang on a Sunday afternoon, 2 weeks after the hearing. Alan opened the door to find Margaret Parker holding a small package wrapped in colorful paper. "Thank you for letting me visit," she said, her voice still hesitant. Margaret's call 3 days after the hearing had surprised Alan. She had timidly asked if she could get to know her niece better. After some reflection, he decided it was the right thing to do. Lily deserved to know her roots. "Welcome," he replied, inviting her in. Lily watched from the living room, partially hidden behind the sofa, Mr. Brown held firmly against her chest. Margaret knelt, bringing herself to the girl's level. "Hello, Lily, I brought you something." She held out the gift. "Your mother and I had one just like it when we were little." With a nod of approval from Alan, Lily approached and opened the package, revealing a small photo album with a floral fabric cover. "These are pictures of your mom," Margaret explained. "So as when she was a child, a teenager, and some of her as an adult too. I thought you'd like to have them." Lily's eyes widened as she saw a girl who looked very much like her smiling in an old photograph. "Is that Mommy?" "Yes," Margaret confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. She was 7 there. "Almost your age." "Look, Daddy!" Lily held up the album, showing a photo of 2 young girls hugging. "It's Mommy and Aunt Margie." The name came out so naturally it surprised everyone in the room. A small smile formed on Margaret's lips, the first one Alan had seen since he met her. That first visit lasted only an hour, but it opened the door for many more. On the following weekends, Margaret returned, each time bringing little stories and memories of Rose's life that helped Lily build a more complete picture of her mother. To Alan's surprise, he felt no jealousy about these connections. He watched with gratitude as his daughter gained not only precious memories, but also an extension of family that he could never provide alone. "You're a rare man, Alan Mercer," Margaret commented once as they watched Lily feed the ducks in Central Park. "Many in your place would have closed the door." Alan shook his head. "Lily deserves to know her roots, and you are an important part of them." As the weeks went by, a comfortable routine was established. Margaret would visit on Sundays, sometimes taking Lily for short outings, other times spending the afternoon at the apartment, telling stories about the Parker family. Lily began to refer to her regularly as Aunt Margie, and would occasionally call to show her a new drawing or tell her about her day at school. Margaret's presence brought an additional dimension to Lily's life, a sense of continuity and belonging that complemented, rather than competed with, the home Alan had created. He now understood that love was not a limited resource that needed to be rationed, but something that grew the more it was shared. On a summer afternoon, Alan transformed the apartment's terrace into a small green oasis. Sitting in the shade, he watched Lily play, spreading colorful drawings everywhere, her latest passion. The sun lit up her brown hair, creating a golden halo around her as she chatted animatedly with Mr. Brown about her artistic creations. Her laughter, clear and crystal, echoed in the air. Alan closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the sound that had become the most important music in his life. "Daddy, look! I drew the three of us!" Lily ran to him, holding a colorful piece of paper. On it, 3 stick figures, a large one wearing a tie, a small one in a blue dress, and a medium-sized one with brown hair, were holding hands under a smiling sun. "You, me, and Aunt Margie at the park." "It's beautiful, sweetheart," he replied, feeling that familiar wave of emotion. "Can I give it to her on Sunday?" "Of course you can. I'm sure she'll love it." Lily smiled, satisfied, and ran back to her drawing table, already planning her next masterpiece. Alan watched her for a long moment, feeling a deep peace he had never known before. The corporate empire he had built, the successful negotiations, the accumulated millions. None of it had brought him a tenth of the happiness he felt now, simply watching his daughter draw on the terrace of his apartment. The man who believed he didn't know how to love had finally discovered that love was not a skill to be mastered or a strategy to be implemented. Love was born from simple gestures, pancakes on Sundays, bedtime stories, bandages on scraped knees, applause for imperfect drawings, and above all, love came from the courage to stay, to choose day after day, to be present, to push through fears, doubts and uncertainties, and still remain. On the cold sidewalk where he had first found Lily, Alan Mercer had found not only an abandoned child, but also the part of himself he had left behind long ago, the capacity to connect, to care, to love without measure. And that, he realized, as he watched his daughter playing under the setting sun, was the true miracle of his story.